no one's getting taken back behind the building and getting shot, like settle down. And
Wow.
yeah.
I love that you share struggles and things that have gone wrong because that's where people learn. That's where the magic is. It's not in seeing someone do everything perfectly. It's seeing how you recover from that. How do you get yourself back up and do the next thing? And so I think that's really helpful with leaders too, because that conversation gets more honest and transparent and people can learn from your mistakes and learn how to pick themselves back up when they don't do well. I would much rather organizations stop spending that money on these perks and really focus on helping leaders become more effective in supporting employees and giving employees the space and time to take care of their wellness the way they need to take care of it. Not everyone's going to use the gym. Not everyone's going to want to do a walking challenge or use a meditation app. They're going to have their own things that they need. So let's give them the space, the time, and a culture where they can thrive, and they're going to be doing well. They don't need those perks. Those perks are nice to have. They're not necessary. So if you don't have that in your culture, that's where you should focus and not worry so much about the programs.
Hi, Zandy. Employee wellness is having a moment, it seems, and I think for good reason. Many of us have experienced some version of burnout sometime over the course of our careers, and that impact is certainly on us as individuals, but it's also on our teammates and our organizations. So the fact that wellness is part of the discussion, I think is a good thing. But then I think about some of the strategies that companies are employing to get there. Foosball tables, yoga classes, mindfulness apps, or other perks. And I'm not knocking those perks, but are they actually working? And more importantly, what can we do to improve our own wellness and the wellness of our teams? Well, that's the conversation we're having today. I'm excited to introduce you to Dr. Patricia Grabarek. She's an industrial organizational psychologist with deep expertise in workplace wellness, culture, and engagement. And she's the co-author of a new book entitled Leading for Wellness: How to Create a Team Culture Where Everyone Thrives. As it turns out, employee wellness isn't about perks. It's about leadership. And that's where most companies get it wrong. In today's discussion, you'll learn what that means, including the difference between leaders who are generators and those who are extinguishers. Patricia will explain what struggle statements are and why you should know about them. You'll learn about some signposts to watch out for so you don't continue down a path towards burnout yourself. And Patricia will share some practical things that she does to help her own wellness journey, including how she recovers after work. You're going to learn all this and more. I can't wait to share the discussion with you. Hey, quick note, if you hold a certification from the Project Management Institute, you can be earning free PDUs right now just by listening. To learn more about how to report those PDUs, go to peopleandprojectspodcast.com/free PDUs. You'll find that link and more in the show notes for this cast. Thanks. Let's jump into our discussion with Patricia about her new book, Leading for Wellness. Hey, Patricia, thank you for joining us on the People and Projects podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here and for this conversation.
Yeah, me too. Let's start with what you mean by wellness. For example, I think some people might think that employee happiness might essentially be the same as wellness. And I know differently because I read your book, but what does wellness not mean? And how do you like to explain what it does mean?
Yeah, happiness can be a part of wellness, but really what it comes down to is wellness is much bigger than that. So wellness isn't just all the things that you see, on Instagram or TikTok of, having the right tea or a bubble bath or whatever.
Right.
Wellness is a lot bigger. And we, in our research, have asked people directly, what is wellness? What does it mean to you? What does workplace wellness specifically mean to you? And what we learned is that people think about wellness holistically. It's very individual. So what it means to me is probably different than what it means to you. But there's some themes. People are really looking for emotional, mental, physical health, and they're looking for balance. How balance is defined varies by person, but they want to feel like they can succeed in both their personal life and at work. So it's a holistic look at wellness, and that's generally what people think about when they think about wellness. They think about themselves as a whole human being, and are they feeling good? Are they doing well?
Yeah. If a company had to answer that question, do you think they would answer it differently of how they would answer what wellness is?
They would definitely answer it differently because a lot of times they think about their wellness programming, which kind of falls into a benefits category.
Right.
So it's more a lot of times you'll hear them talk about healthcare being part of their wellness benefits, right? Which obviously it is important for your wellness, but I don't think employees really look at it that way. They don't think about healthcare. They don't think about the mindfulness app or, the access to dietitians or whatever as their wellness. That's like, those are tools that can help them, but that's
Mhm.
not true wellness.
Yeah. Yeah. I love the holistic nature of your book. And you talk in the book about people being generators or extinguishers. I mentioned that in the intro. I'm curious about your experience with extinguishers, who, as I understand from your book, are people who zap employees' energy and morale. That's kind of like the idea in a sense, isn't it? I mean, and I'm supposing no one wakes up in the morning and thinks, I can't wait to be an extinguisher today. So I think maybe we drift to the dark side here, right? I mean, what are some examples of
Right.
factors that can cause us to drift to be an extinguisher?
Yeah, I think you're right. I don't think anyone's waking up and being like, I want to make work suck for everybody around me.
Please, please.
That would be, I mean, I don't want to meet that person if they exist. But what happens is people get really focused on their work. So this can look like a person that's like, I don't want to know about your personal life. We're at work. We're only talking about work,
Yeah.
right? So they're so hyper focused on work. They see employees as just workers only. They're the ones that are doing the things that need to be done to reach their goals. They're not kind of expanding the way that they think about their relationships at work to get to know people and really understand, what people need and how to support them. They're just so focused on productivity that nothing else matters. Even though we know that being well helps you be more productive, right? So you that you can't kind of escape that, but if you
Mm.
are one of those people that is just super focused on productivity and don't want to talk about anything else, you could easily fall into a trap of being an extinguisher.
I feel like sometimes when it feels like the pressure is on for a project manager, like at the
Mhm.
end of a project or things are going wrong, it's on my best days, I'm okay, right? But on my worst days, that's when I don't realize it. I've kind of drifted over to be an extinguisher.
Yeah. And I think what's important is on those best days, creating an environment where employees can speak up, right? So that when you are in that situation where you're really under pressure, they recognize that you're under pressure and then they help you, right? They
Yeah.
come in, they help, and they're like, hey, like, just so you know, you're coming off a little bit like this right now. I know there's a lot of stress. Like, how can we support? So then they support you back. Like, if you do this well, you are supporting your employees, but they're also supporting you.
Such a good point. Like one of my favorite hires over the years, he was a former Vietnam vet, and just that whole experience gave him perspectives that I could not even
Mm.
appreciate. But one day when I didn't have this vocabulary, but I was being an extinguisher. I'm sure he called me into my office. He goes, "Come here, come here, come here. No one's getting taken back behind the building and getting shot. Like settle down." and I,
Wow.
yeah, or somebody else recently said that their terminology is, "Hey, no one's bleeding out on a table today." It's like, and so anyway, it's just this perspective that maybe enough psychological safety had been created. Not only are we trying to help them, but on our bad days, they're trying to help us, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And so for these extinguishers, like, I think it's important that a lot of people aren't 100% of the time extinguishers, right? There
Right,
are going
right,
to be leaders like that,
yeah.
but people will have bright spots and then these less positive spots. But if you focus as a leader on becoming more of a generator and really building a good culture, then those bad moments you can get through and the team can get through and you can support each other through it and it'll be fine and you'll get reminded, right? But I think that it can be really easy if you have layers above you, leaders
Mhm.
that are putting pressure on you, it can be easy to kind of fall into that trap of becoming an
So
extinguisher. So learning how to navigate that, which is challenging, but can really help you get to a better place as a team.
yeah. So I want to pass this by because I feel like with a lot of things, it's not if you are, it's when you are, and I
Hmm.
think that applies to a lot of things. It's situational or contextual. And I think people listening to us they can probably think of extinguishers, but they probably don't think of them as extinguishers, right? Because we're not always zapping energy or morale, but maybe we do, like you and I were just talking about situations.
Hmm.
And so we might miss the fact that we fall into this mode sometimes. So what are your thoughts about what you call inconsistent extinguishers, if I got that right from the book?
Yeah, inconsistent extinguishers are exactly that, right? These are the people that we've been talking about this whole time that are
Hmm.
sometimes really great and other times they're not. And I think something that happens with some inconsistent extinguishers is it depends on not just the situation, right? If they're feeling a lot of pressure, but also the context. So maybe they, let's say this leader has children.
Hmm.
So when somebody asks to take some time to, leave work early because their kid is sick, they get it. So they're super supportive, but then they've never had a pet, let's say.
Yeah.
And when an employee's like, hey, my dog just ate like a weird thing of string, that leader is then kind of like, it's just a dog.
Right.
Like we need you to be at this meeting, right?
Hmm.
sometimes it's just not always having that full perspective of what another person might be experiencing that's different than your situation and your experience, and being able to see like how can you support them even though you've never gone through that before.
That's good. Yeah, that'd be an easy thing to miss. Yeah. I'd never heard of the term struggle statements or that idea of even as a tool before. So, how do you like describe what they are, and how does it help us, like on our maybe our own personal wellness journey?
Yeah. So a struggle statement, you haven't heard of it because we've made it up.
There you go. That
But
explains
um,
it.
basically, what we learned is that when leaders are authentic and vulnerable at work, their employees can relate to them better, and you start to build trust and create those relationships where you can really understand what each other needs, right? And one tool that we have found that can work pretty well is a struggle statement for leaders that are not comfortable with
Mhm.
sharing things authentically or not comfortable being vulnerable. Like we're told that leaders are supposed to be, perfect, super competent, never have issues, right? They're the ones that you go to when you need help, but they don't need help because they're great. They're leaders, right?
Mm.
But that's not true. Leaders are people. They fail at things. They're not always doing well. And when you have this like ideal leader, if that's the persona you're putting on, then your employees don't trust you and they feel a distance, right,
Yeah.
between you and that leader. So a struggle statement is simply just making note of things that you've struggled with before, you're currently struggling with, so that you have something to talk about when an employee is struggling with something, or start sharing it as a way to create a connection, right? So maybe you're talking about a new project that's coming on, and as a leader, like you've had this kind of project before, like you've done this type of thing, but you had some difficulty with the deadline in the
Mhm.
past, right? Sharing, like, as we're going into this, hey, there was one time I did this project and we missed the deadline. These are some things that I learned. That helps people see, oh, they missed a deadline. So that means they're real, right? They've had problems, they've had challenges, and then they can learn from your mistakes or your issues before. But you can also share struggles of things that you are still struggling with. Like,
Mm.
let's say a new leader is coming in and they've never managed budgets, right? That's a big thing at certain levels. Once you get to that level, you're suddenly managing budgets. You've probably never done it before. And maybe you suck at numbers. Like that
Mhm.
is not your thing. So now you're here, you're having to manage budgets. It's not off the table to share that with your team, and maybe you find someone on your team that's really good at this, right? You can say like, I struggle with learning budgets. Like, has anyone done this before? Do you want to work with me on this? So now you're getting people involved and they understand that you are not 100% perfect, so that when they have a problem or an area of growth, an area where they're developing, they're not scared to talk about it.
So good. I'm about 24 years into full time teaching project management and leadership, but early on, I'd be giving all these examples. And I got feedback once from someone of like, would you share some of the times where you failed? And it made me realize I was only given the positive examples. And so I started giving more of like, I feel now, Patricia, that everything I teach is examples, blood on my hands. I've made mistakes somewhere along the lines. And I think it does help in the interactions, right? But isn't it
Mhm.
counterintuitive? I think sometimes people think, no, the leader has to be shiny armor, right? And present themselves as not flawless. That's exaggerating, but it just don't show weakness. And
Yeah.
weakness is not necessarily the same as struggle, right?
Yeah, I would agree with that. Weakness, I mean, I think when we think about weaknesses, we think about things that you can't overcome, right? But you can
Hmm.
overcome a struggle and
Right.
you can grow in an area that's maybe an opportunity for you. These are things that you can develop or learn from. And I love that you share struggles and things that have gone wrong because that's where people learn. That's where the
Mm.
magic is. It's not in seeing someone do everything perfectly. It's seeing how you recover from that. How do
Yeah.
you like get yourself back up and do the next thing? And so I think that's really helpful with leaders too, because that conversation gets more honest and transparent, and people can learn from your mistakes, and learn how to pick themselves back up when they don't do well.
Yeah. I heard a senior leader actually just recently say, I'm not burned out because I'm starting to realize how tired I am. And so I just thought that was an interesting way of saying it because it makes me realize sometimes I don't even know the difference of those sometimes. So what are some maybe signposts on the road towards burnout that maybe we should be paying attention to that for our own wellness? What comes to mind?
Mhm. Well, exhaustion is a piece of
Mhm.
burnout. But where's the exhaustion stemming from, right? If you have a bunch of little kids at your house, maybe it's just that you're not sleeping. It has nothing to do with work, right? So
Mhm.
think about where that exhaustion is stemming from. Is it because you're working way too many hours? Is it because of things external? Is it because the work is taxing in and of itself, like you're working in a really difficult environment, maybe you're like an ER doctor, right? That would cause a lot of stress and create exhaustion, can lead to burnout because it's specific to that work.
Yeah.
The other thing to look out for is, what are you enjoying? A lot of people will go into a field or into a career because they like something about it, right? You might not like everything about your job. There's always
Yeah.
going to be something that's not fun. But the things that you used to do that you loved, right? Like, let's say you really loved building a project plan. I know a lot of people really like that kind of detail and all of that fun
It's
stuff,
true.
right? And all of a sudden it feels tedious, or it takes you twice as long as it used to take you. That is when you can start to take a step back and be like, wait a second, like, am I burning out? Am I in a burnout because I'm not getting joy and excitement from the things that I used to get excitement from? And then there's a sense of cynicism that comes with burnout too. So this idea of like, kind of feeling like things are not going to go well, always being cynical and not having any of that positivity. So if you're starting to see, like, I went from being a smiley person, a person that's really positive and excited on my team, and now I'm not. I actually have a story of a coworker at a previous organization I worked at a while ago. Pretty bad climate. And the person that the story is about, when they first started, so enthusiastic, such a big smile on their face. Like, they were known as being like this bubbly person. A few years later, some new hires were coming in, and he like laughed at a joke a few months after. So these new hires came in 3 months later. They were having lunch, and he laughed at a joke. And one of the new hires said, "Wow, it's so nice to see you smile." And he was like, "What? I am known to be like this really bubbly guy, and that these people that have known me for only a few months don't see that." So that's when he recognized, like, oh my gosh, like, what happened? What has changed? So seeing those kinds of changes can be a good signal.
That's good. And self-awareness is hard to do, but if we get some signal from people around us, paying attention, they're like, "Oh yeah, that's interesting." Every once in a while, maybe one of my kids will say, "Dad, you got that angry face." I'm like, "What?" But they're picking up on, it's not angry as much as just focused or distracted or whatever. And so, yeah, picking up on the little signals there. Yeah. You mentioned in the book that one particularly impactful way to improve our wellness is recover after work. Right? And so I'm just curious if you're up for sharing. What are some
Yeah.
examples of those things that you do personally to recover after work?
So it's a great question. And I try to practice all the best practices. Of course, I'm not always perfect. Struggle statement right there.
Yep.
But
Mhm.
there's 4 key ways that people should look to recover, right? And that we know is good in the research. So it's like relaxation, detachment, so like getting yourself away from work, control, so finding a way to feel more controlled in your environment, so maybe making some plans, and then mastery. Mastery is number 1. That's learning something new. So there's a couple things that I do. Like, one, I have become a Pilates girly.
Is
No,
that
that's such a
right?
trend,
Yeah.
but I
Yeah.
love it. There's a sense of accomplishment, right? When you do something that like has been really hard for you, like you start with one type of plank, and then all of a sudden you can do this other kind of plank with like a leg in the air, and you're like, what? How did that happen? So that is really cool, right? That feeling of accomplishment there. And so there's some mastery associated with that. But the other thing I've learned about myself, like, if I want to learn a new skill, and that again is super replenishing for folks, I will often take. I've heard of like I think they're called woobles. They're these little crochet creatures. You can get a little pack, and it gives you instructions on how to crochet like a tiny little like duck or
Yeah.
something.
Yeah.
And it's just something that I'm physically with my hands. I can't look at my phone
Right.
because
Right.
I'm holding this item.
Mhm. Mhm.
And I'm learning how to do something new. And at the end, I have like this tiny little creature that I made. Um, so that's, I think, a really good example of something that helps me, especially in a really stressed out week,
Yeah.
just to fully detach from my phone, from my
Yeah.
computer, and just sit there and make a little creature,
Yeah.
learn something new, and feel accomplished.
That's cool. That might be a big takeaway from the people listening to this. I've never heard of a wooble. I think out of the 4 of them, I mean, I can relate to all of them. And detachment, I generally like to cycle for exercise, and I feel like when I'm out on a bike, I can't really be on my phone. There's nature. There's the cardio part of it. There's just so many parts of it. I love it. But the controls surprised me because in the sense of, it just feels like detachment. Yeah, relax. Yeah. But would you mind giving an example of control? Because I think it's actually counterintuitively really, I can relate to it.
Yeah. So control, The reason why that's so helpful for recovery after work is because when you're feeling stressed out, you're often feeling out of control.
Exactly.
Like you may not define it that way when you think about it. It's like, oh, I'm so stressed. But think about it. I'm so stressed because I have so many things to do and I don't know how I'm going to finish it all, right? So you
Hmm.
don't feel like you're in control. So what can you do to bring some control back into your day?
Yeah.
And that helps you feel like, okay, I can do this. I can tackle this, right? So
Hmm.
it could be something as simple as like going through your calendar and like blocking out, like, okay, these are the times that I'm going to work out this week, or I'm going to, set aside this meal plan, right? I'm going to build a meal plan, let's say,
Yeah.
or I want to build a chore list for my kids and my family.
Hmm.
So I'm going to do that. So now you feel like you've got some control, you've got some time sensitive things that you can work with, and you start to feel like you have ownership of your life again versus having it being kind of pulled in a million directions by other people.
You know, once again, I never had the vocabulary for this, but my wife will sometimes say, she goes, man, I just feel like the house is so out of control. I just want to clean this one part right here. And
Mm-hmm.
in a sense, that's bringing control over that one area, right?
Yeah.
And it just,
Yes.
yeah. I think there's times where I get a weird joy of coming up with a menu plan for the next week, because
Mm-hmm.
I can take a little bit off my wife who normally used to do that. And it's like, no, I actually like doing that. She doesn't like doing that. And we work together on it. It's a little bit of control. Yeah.
Yeah. It brings some structure to your day when you're feeling like you have no structure, right? And
Mhm.
things are just chaotic.
Yeah.
So it's really helpful, especially if you're dealing with overwhelm.
Yeah. I think it's interesting. What's an example of someone who's made this journey? Because I think maybe it's easy to think the extinguisher is always going to be an extinguisher. Like, can you think of an example of someone who is maybe primarily characterized as that, but they became known as a generator over time, and maybe some of the things they did to fuel that?
Yeah, so we actually write about this one person in our book. Her name is Melanie. Well, the fictional name we gave
Right.
her is Melanie. We will not share her actual name, but
Mhm.
she raised her hand to be part of our study because she wanted to talk about a leader that she had that was fantastic. And then as we talked to her, we started realizing that she had gone through this journey because of these other leaders. So she probably herself would have started off as if she would self-identify that she was an extinguisher.
Mm.
She was living trying to live up to that like ideal leader norm, right? She was
Yeah.
always like showing positivity and trying to make sure everybody feels like everything's okay, everything's gonna be fine, everything's great, we're moving forward, like there's no cracks, right? Everything looks perfect all the
Yeah.
time. I won't go into all the details, but she had dealt with some tragedy in her life, which made it harder for her to keep being this polished, super, really inauthentic version of herself at work. And that made her start to kind of struggle a bit. And as she started seeing other leaders during COVID that
Mhm.
were sharing struggles that they were having and talking about it, and seeing that like people weren't suddenly discounting those leaders or thinking that they're not competent or whatever, then she started sharing a bit more and more of herself. And that helped the team open up. Like she shared what she was struggling with, like the loss that she was dealing with and how that was impacting her. And because she was realizing she can't not crack, right? Like a little
Yeah.
thing at work that's stressing her out is going to have a bigger impact right now because she's dealing with other stuff. So her team rallied around her. They were relieved to see that she was actually a real person, right?
Mhm.
That there's
Mhm.
some depth there. And then they were able to build relationships, talk about these things, talk about mental health challenges. She started sharing more and more about things that she dealt with her mental health and how did she overcome it so that people would start to open up, and she was able to shift the whole team culture because she finally was open, that other people could step in and they could all support each other.
I love that. And that's just one of many stories in the book that people can be inspired by. Beyond personal wellness, I'd like to talk a bit about wellness at the organizational level, and we'll talk about what we can positively do to, improve employee wellness. But what about what's not working? What are some common things that organizations do? And I think they have good intentions, right? But they just don't really make a meaningful difference.
Yeah, well, we talked about how organizations define wellness, right? And thinking
Hmm.
about wellness programming.
Hmm.
So that's really what organizations are spending their money on. And while, it can be nice, like if I get a free gym membership, like I'm going to take it if I
Yeah.
can use it. But the problem is that that doesn't help if there's any toxicity in the culture, if there's overwork issues, you're not going to be able to take advantage of those perks and benefits, right? So employers are sitting there thinking, here's all these great things I'm giving my employees so they can manage their own wellness, versus recognizing that the system that the employees in can actually have a much, much bigger impact than these perks. So I would much rather organizations stop spending that money on these perks and really focus on helping leaders become more effective in supporting employees and giving employees the space and time to take care of their wellness the way they need to take care of it. Not everyone's going to use the gym. Not everyone's going to want to do a walking challenge or use
Right.
a meditation app. They're going to have their own things that they need. So let's give them the space, the time, and a culture where they can thrive. And they're going to be doing well. They don't need those perks. Those perks are nice to have. They're not necessary. So if you don't have that in your culture, that's where you should focus and not worry so much about the programs.
I took from the book just that we are treating the symptoms, but not the cause, right? And so
Exactly.
get to the cause, and that's leadership. So, people need to get a copy of the book to really understand, because it's packed with all kinds of ideas, but just one or two things that you've seen leaders do kind of to make a difference in the way that you're talking about.
Yeah, well, I think I'm going to bring up the authenticity piece again
Mhm.
because it's the place to start. If you can be authentic with your team and really start to open up and share who you are and what you look for from a wellness perspective, employees will start to share the same thing. And on top of that, the other thing I would say is role modeling. Um, so you need to show that boundaries are okay, right? Like it's okay to say no to something. It's okay to say, hey, I've got to go to my kid's soccer game. So I'm going to go do that. Or I have a doctor's appointment and I'm going to go do that. And being very upfront about it so people know that that's what you're doing, right? So it's not just role modeling that you're not there,
Right.
like, oh, Patricia left work early today and that's it. Saying why can really help people start to see, like, oh, there's an ability to be flexible in my work life so that I can take care of the things I need to take care of. And it's not frowned upon. Like my leader supports that. So being very vocal about what you're modeling is helpful too.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so easy to say, well, I'm going to try to set boundaries, but by not giving visibility to it, maybe people don't get the learning opportunity from it. If I
Hmm.
understand you right. Yeah. And
Yeah, they don't
yeah.
realize that you're setting those boundaries. They don't know what's going on there, right? So they might see, okay, it doesn't seem like she's working all the time. But I don't really know what's happening.
Mhm.
But then if they see you really enforcing boundaries and explaining what those boundaries are, then people can start to follow.
And this is maybe not exactly the same, but it comes to mind where maybe someone, because of the rhythm of their life, it's easier to get up at 4, do some email, do some other things, and then come into work a little bit later. If they are explicit about it, it's like, by the way, I'm not trying to say respond at 4:30 in the morning to my emails. Like
Hmm.
give transparency into why I'm doing this lifestyle wise, but I don't expect you to do that same sort of thing. And so perhaps
Yeah. And I
helping it
think
reduce that.
exactly. I think that there's being transparent, like this is my schedule. Like I am working only, 8 hours or whatever it is,
Mhm.
but this is the way I make my schedule. The other thing is talking about it, but then also scheduling emails and messages, right? Like everything, like text, you can now schedule, right?
Mhm.
That helps because then you're saying, like, I am balancing my work around my life, but I'm only going to schedule it during these work hours so that you don't feel the pressure. So
That's
like
it.
there's two different types of employees. If we're kind of being
Mhm.
very simplistic, there's integrators and segmenters.
Mhm.
Integrators are that person that you just talked about, right? These are people that love to integrate work and life. They're going to work at 4 or 5 in the morning because that works for them. Then they're going to spend 3 hours doing something else. And they're going to come back to work and they're going to go off and pick up kids and they're going to just integrate work and life very seamlessly. And they like that. But there are people that are segmenters and they want work to sit within a certain time
Mhm.
period, right?
Yeah.
9 to 5, and that's it. They don't want to see an email at 9 p.m. So, a way that those two groups can work together is by scheduling. Schedule your emails, schedule your messages so that they can get to it when they get to it, when they come into the office and they don't feel that like nagging stress outside of their hours.
Yeah. Just examples. So many things I'd love to talk with you about, but let's end it with this because we have a lot of parents who listen to the podcast. What comes to mind about ideas from your research that might help foster a positive culture of wellness at home?
I think all of these things kind of are able to be used at home
I think
because
so.
you want boundaries, right, with your
Hmm.
family too,
Hmm.
making that very explicit. And then also, I think, especially with kids, like modeling that self care, that recovery period. Like, I need some time to make my little wooble, or I'm going to go to Pilates. And then they can see, like, oh, mom is taking care of herself, right? She's going and she's doing this thing. And maybe when they're young, they don't get it right away, but over time, it's going to really register. So I think modeling as a parent is super helpful too.
Yeah. Well, for those listening, you've just gotten a brief introduction to Patricia's new book. If you want a practical, evidence based guide to improving your wellness and the wellness of your team, get a copy of her new book, Leading for Wellness. I'll put links to the book and the book's website in the show notes for this cast. So, Patricia, thank you so much for joining us on the People and Projects podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. It was fun.
Well, special thanks to Patricia for joining us here on episode 461 of the People and Projects podcast. Yeah, I certainly enjoyed the conversation. Very easy person to talk with. I think you'd find the book pretty interesting. It's heavily evidence-based, a lot of research to back it up. I tend to be a little bit skeptical when I see models of you are this or you are that. And so Patricia and I talked about that. It's much more when we are. And the reason why I think that's important is, as I said in the interview, like you and I, we don't think of ourselves as extinguishers, but there's probably times where if we're not careful, we might start drifting that way. And so just sometimes that's where the terminology can be helpful of, I think I was just an extinguisher in that meeting. Or if we have it even as part of the team vocabulary of like, yeah, I think we may be drifting that sort of way. So that's where I think these sorts of things are helpful. I'd be curious what you think about this vulnerability, because I'm where she's at, where I think sometimes there's this perception that we have to hold ourselves up as, just ironclad, I'm not that we'd ever say we're perfect, but that there's almost like disincentives in place to show vulnerability. And so the struggle statement idea that they have in the book, I think it feels risky to do, but to me, it's a little bit of a dance where you self-disclose some of these things you're struggling with, but not in a, so I suck. And, it's more along the lines of, hey, here's an area that I struggle and I'm working on it. Or this is an area that I struggle and I would love for you to kind of, cover me on that because you're so good at that. It can lead to things other than just like, oh, these are my weaknesses. I think this vulnerability just makes us all more real. And by the way, I've seen that not only at work, I've seen that at home and talking to my kids, because I think sometimes kids view their parent or parents as just, well, you've got it all together because you've learned it and you're older. And there's times where I've had just these conversations of transparency and vulnerability of like, I struggled with that as well. And they're like, I never knew that. So maybe you needed to hear that. I don't know. But I just think that idea can help us when it comes to leading and having a ripple effect of wellness. And then the last thing I want to mention is her comments about boundaries, of not only, of course, setting the boundaries, which I think sometimes we don't do a good enough job at, right? And so thinking through of where is it that I'm allowing work to spill over, or the stress of certain situations to spill over, finding some boundaries. I have a friend who is a public school teacher, and he just sets really hard boundaries on the summer. He goes, that's the best reason to be a teacher is summer's off. And so he's so good. They try to draw him in during the summers. And he's just like, he gives it a strong, clear transparency about the boundaries of, I don't work then. And just trying to think, what would that equivalent be for you, where you're like, this is a boundary, but also the transparency so people know it. I think it's a good book. I wouldn't say it's a must read, but I do think it's a book that you would not normally pick up just by looking at the title, looking at the cover. I think it's easily a book that you wouldn't pick up, but it's a difference that we can make for ourselves and for our team. And something I learned from Jim Harder, the chief scientist at Gallup, is that if we can get, if we can help people thrive at work, not only does it help us at work, like individually and as a team, it actually spills over into their lives outside of work. That people that thrive at work actually do better outside of work as well. So there's a lot of virtuous benefits for us getting better at this. If you pick up a copy of the book, I'd love to hear what you take away from it. You can reach me at show@peopleandprojectspodcast.com. And whether it's from the book or today's discussion, let me know. If you'd like more on this topic, I put links in the show notes to a couple episodes. First of all, episode 448 with Marie Helen Pelletier. She has a book called The Resilience Plan. And it, basically her message is you're not as resilient as you think. You're closer to burnout than what you think if you're not careful. And I feel like it's a practical book, and I enjoyed the discussion a lot. If you haven't listened to episode 448 yet, check that out. Also, episode 398 with Dr. Neha Sangwan, a medical doctor And she talks very transparently about her burnout journey and just how medicine overall is a very unhealthy business when it comes to burnout. And so I think you'll find some really practical ideas from that book. And then finally, episode 324, it is with Jim Harder, that chief scientist at Gallup. And Jim's once again, researcher. He's not a pundit. And he's got Gallup-based research, incredible sample sizes to help us build resilient cultures. So I put links to those episodes in the show notes for the cast. Hey, you've heard me if you've listened to the podcast for a while talking about our AI class. If you haven't joined us for that, especially if you feel like you're not really taking advantage of AI. I mean, if you're far down the road and you're in it every day doing extensive advanced prompts, that's not the one for you. But if you feel like, man, I just hear people talking about it maybe more, or I've got a friend who says, I'm just kind of a skeptic, and I feel like one way to get past my skepticism or to inform my skepticism is to use it and then see what it's good at and what it's not good at, right? So it's AI made simple. It's the URL for it is ai.peopleandprojectspodcast.com. Check it out. And I just want to say thank you for listening. Thank you for leaving reviews on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen. I'm telling you, it just makes such a difference. It's so encouraging, certainly to me, but also to my team. And you know what? Here's the deal. We hear from people almost every day that are listening to the podcast. And if you haven't sent a note in a while, I'd love to hear from you. You can reach me at show@peopleandprojectspodcast.com. On behalf of me and my team, thank you so much for listening.